Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Comfort Ride suspension system here on our 2021 Grand Design Reflection fifth wheel trailer. If you're looking to upgrade the ride quality of your trailer and put less wear and tear on your tow vehicle, then look no further. The Roadmaster Comfort Ride has it right in the name. It's going to give you a much more comfortable ride and help with those maintenance issues that you typically are going to have on your tow vehicle because of all that force just transferring through our frame rails up to the tow vehicle. Now, typically with your suspension, you're going to have just maybe a standard Equalizer. Maybe you have an upgraded one like from MORRIDE, like our neighbor had previously on here, and that's got a little bit of shock absorption in it to kind of help deal with that, but it doesn't really fit all of the boxes there. With this one, it's going to have a independence between the two axles. So now instead of having our axles teeter-totter and shift that weight back and forth between the two and potentially kind of force that up and create more chucking with our trailer, we now have these separated with our slipper spring box. So the hook end of our slipper springs are sitting inside this box and they have a nice range of motion that they can travel through. So that way we're still allowing travel with our axle and our suspension here, but we're not forcing it onto the other axle and causing kind of a headache between the two. Along with that, on the back side, we have some shock absorbers in there, and that's going to really help us with the absorption of all that road shock that comes up through, but it's also going to help with sway because now when the trailer wants to try and lean one way, we've got shock absorbers to kind of help try and push that back up and prevent that swaying side to side. Now, when picking out your Roadmaster Comfort Ride system, there are a few things that you're going to want to consider. Number one, probably replace your U-bolts. Honestly, anytime you take the U-bolts off, you should be replacing them anyway, but Roadmaster does tell you that if you do have enough threads on it for the tie plate for our shocks to fit on there, then you can reuse them. I have never run into a case where the threads were long enough for me to actually use it, so I would go ahead and just pick up a set of U-bolts with your kit. Make sure that you are picking out one per axle too. So if you have a triple axle, tandem axle, you want to make sure that you're getting enough of those U-bolt kits because it's one per axle. And along with that, you're also going to want to make sure that you're getting the correct capacity. So when we look at our axle tube, there is a sticker on the back side of it, and it's typically a white sticker, whether it's from Lippert or Dexter, and that's going to give us our axle capacity. Now, sometimes that sticker likes to wear off, or it just gets kind of torn up just from use of the trailer, so you might have to get down there and just measure that axle tube. And if you're coming up with 3-inch axle tube, then you're probably sitting in that 5,200 pound to 7,000 pound range. So that can give you a pretty good idea of what you're needing to get here and also tell you exactly what U-bolts to pick out. There really isn't much when it comes to specialty tools or anything like that that you have to pick up. It's really just a lot of prep. So the big thing here is lifting up the trailer, making sure that it's secure, having jack stands in either a bottle jack or a floor jack so that you can kind of play with your suspension and move it around as you start to get components in to make sure that everything is sitting flush and correct when you mount it all up. So this can be kind of a big job if you don't have the tools. We obviously have some decent sized lifts here to help actually pick the trailer up and then have all these jacks to do this. So this might be something that you just don't have the equipment to do at home, or you just don't have the space to do it. And if that is the case for you, then please feel free to use our dealer locator, and you can enter in your zip code to find a shop near you and get it professionally installed. If you are going to be doing this yourself, stick around and I'll walk you through the process. So starting off our install, I've already got my trailer jacked up and I've got my wheels both off. On the other side of our trailer, so the other end of our axles, we also want to support that. So if you have 4 jack stands, that's going to make this a lot easier for you. Otherwise, you are going to need a pry bar and a floor jack or bottle jack, something that you're going to use to help lift that up. Because right now what you see is our suspension is sitting up. Now, when we lift up our trailer by the frame, that's going to want to drop our suspension down just from the weight of the wheels. And then you'll see these kind of switch from that W shape downwards into more of an M shape. And the problem with that is then it throws off the angle of the spring seat on your axle. So when you're getting that first side on, it's going to want to fight you a whole bunch when you're putting the leaf springs in. But you can avoid all that by jacking up the axles as well. Just have that brace under there so that way it can't fall down and do that to you. Otherwise, like I said, what you want to do is go on the other side. You can jack that one axle up that you're working on. So say I was doing the leaf spring over here, I would jack that axle back up and I'll usually stick my pry bar right in between our shackle straps and I'll use that to kind of lift it right back up. and then I'll leave the jack over there. Now, I've already got the other side all squared away, so I don't have to worry about that. I already fought through that, but that's something you'll experience when you're at home doing this yourself. So once we get past the whole setup process here, the next thing is going to be removing our suspension. So if we want to just take this all out in one giant piece here, we'll need to disconnect the U-bolts on both axles, and then we'll have to pop out each one of our hanger bolts. So there's gonna be 3 of those. Typically, I like to just start with popping the nuts off each one of those, and then you'll have to come back and actually hammer those bolts out because they are pressed into our hanger. There's little splines that are gonna be on the bolt that I can show you in just a little bit here. And then from there, that's when I'll go and I'll take out the U-bolts and then just drop all of it all at once. So I'm gonna start out by popping off those nuts. On the bolt head side, I'm using a 13/16 wrench. On the nut side, I'm using an 11/16 socket. And we'll just get these off. We wanna make sure that our bolt head does not move, specifically because of those splines. We don't want that to wear out the inner ring that we have inside of our hanger. And it doesn't hurt to have a trash box or something by you, because there's a lot of components here we're just going to be throwing right in the trash. For my U-bolts, typically you're going to be using a 3/4 inch socket, and I'm going to crack each one of these loose, and then I'll come back with my ratchet and just kind of run them all off. Another thing to talk about here is with these U-bolts, Roadmaster says that you can reuse them, but unfortunately there's not enough thread for us to use this and then still put on our plate for our shock kit. So this is an instance where we are going to have to replace the U-bolts, which I've found every single one of the installs that I've done here, it's always needed to be replaced. They're just not quite long enough. So I would go ahead and make sure that you check out your axle capacity, make sure that you're getting the correct replacement U-bolts and get the longest ones you can, so that way you got plenty of thread for that bracket, plus your tie plate to sit on, and then you should be all good to go and not have to stop mid-install to get some new parts. I need to use a hammer to kind of get your U-bolts to finally drop out of there. Now for our next part, we're going to be popping out those bolts for our hangers. Now you might need a punch with you as well to kind of just push that through all the way. Sometimes once you get it partially through, then the leaf springs tension kind of wants to push it back up and not let it go. But since we already kind of have everything loose, we might luck out and not have that issue. Which looks like we are going to have that issue, so never mind. I'm going to grab my center punch, we'll push that out the rest of the way and keep working our way down. Work our suspension out of the way. Just pop it all out as one piece. And I'm going to go toss this so it's not in our way going forward. Next step is going to be putting our slipper spring box up on our center hanger, and we have a few things in the way on this trailer. So our underbelly here, this material cannot be in the way. We need full contact with our slipper spring box to our frame rail. So we will have to cut that off, and then also there's the screws that are securing the underbelly up to the frame rail. We're going to pop those out as well. I'm going to do that right now, and then we'll put our slipper spring box up and mark out the underbelly that we need to cut. What I like to do is just put it up on there, see if you can slip in one of the bolts. Sometimes the underbelly is a little bit too thick and you gotta kind of just hold it up and mark it, but in our case, I've got it pretty much how I want it, and I'll usually lay under here, making sure my slipper spring box is flush with my rail. Take my paint marker. We'll just mark that all out. And now we have an outline for where we need to cut. And I'll usually just use my razor blade. The underbelly material really isn't that tough. Now with the underbelly removed, we can put our slipper spring box back in place. And we're going to mark out our holes, which we're going to have 2 on each side, and that's going to be up against our frame rail. So it's important that you have this nice and straight. We don't want this to be crooked, because then that's going to throw off, because our leaf springs need to match right up with this, so that means it needs to match up with the spring seats on our axles. So once we get it right how we want it, I'm going to just mark the entirety of the hole. That way I know where I can drill through. And once we have it marked, we can then pull our slipper spring box back down. We're going to take our center punch and mark out our holes to drill through. Now with this being an I-beam frame, I don't want to be too close to the center. So this hole right here is pretty close to the center. I want to kind of get more out towards the outside of it, but I don't want to go all the way out because this is a decent sized bolt that's going to be going through here. So I go just slightly off to the outer edge. Hit that a couple times, making sure that I'm right in the center. Get it all the way up to a 21/64 drill bit. Now, we're going to sit here forever if we do that. What we're going to do is drill a much smaller hole through and then just keep chipping away at it until we get up to that, and that's going to make this a whole lot easier. So I'm going to start out with an 1/8 inch drill bit and then just work my way up every other size until I get up to that 21/64. And that's going to make this a lot faster and simpler here. I also like to use my knee to kind of help make sure that my drill is going straight up and to kind of keep pressure on it. Now, when I did the other side, I ran into some other issues that I would want to talk about here. So there was an angle iron, which is on this side as well. So when I drill in through this hole, I'm not only going through the frame rail, but I'm also going through that piece of angle iron. Now, there were wires on the other side, so I had to make sure that when I was drilling that, I had that up well away from our drill bit so I wouldn't accidentally damage the wiring. It's a good point now to kind of just check, make sure there's nothing else in here. Looks like we're going to miss the other piece of angle iron on this side, so we're good over here. But if there was any wires or anything like that, you want to make sure that you're keeping those nice and protected and away from where you're drilling at. One other instance I also had was they ran a box, they just welded it to the frame rail all along the lip here, and they had their hydraulics running through it. Unfortunately, I had to cut that whole opening of the box up and then use wire loom clamps to bolt the hydraulic lines up higher away from it, because we're going to have some bolts that are going to stick up through here. I've got some right over here, I believe. Yep. So here's one of those bolts. It's a self-tapping screw, and once we get this drilled out enough, we're going to use this, and it's going to cut threads right into the frame rail as it comes up. But you can see we've got probably a good 3/4 inches sitting above our frame rail. So anything that's living up on this top of the frame rail, we're going to have to remove or relocate it, just to make sure that our hardware isn't going to end up rubbing on it. So you're going to have a whole bag of these screws, which pretty much match up the same as the ones that we're going to use for our slipper spring box. The only difference is there's a flat screwdriver head on it instead for our slipper spring box. Make sure that we're doing this nice and straight. They call for blue Loctite on these bolts. We've just got like a little glue stick version of it. That's honestly perfect for this style of kit. We're just going to get some on each one of our bolts. So now we're going to take one of our 9/16 bolts and lock nut, 2 of our washers, and 1 of the shorter spacers, and that's going to sit on the inside of our slipper spring box and our hanger. So we'll lift our slipper spring box back into place. We're going to throw on one washer and our nut. Get that started in there. Use that to kind of help hold it up while we fish our spacer into place. Just a little bit off. Where are we? There we go. All the way through. Then on the back side, we're going to throw on another washer and our lock nut. We're just going to leave that loose for right now, just kind of hand tight. And now we're going to kind of line this back up, so kind of feel on either side there. Make sure you're nice and level with your frame. What I like to do is get these bolts all in a good majority of the way, but not all the way, and then I'll kind of adjust this too. If you're using an impact, make sure that you definitely stop before the head fully rests against the inside of our slipper spring box. It's super easy to snap the bolt head off with an impact. It's a lot better to come back with your wrench, and I'm actually going to torque these. Get this lined up, and I'm using a 9/16 socket. The spring plate right here, you can see it's sitting nice and parallel with our frame rail. Now, when the suspension drops, this is going to start angling down, and then our leaf spring pack's not going to want to sit flush on here and then line up with our hanger hole or our slipper spring box. So that's where I was saying you got to go over to the other side, jack up that axle, and then it should kind of bring it back to where you need it to be, so that way you can get everything lined up on the side you're working on. Now, in our case, which seems to be something that everybody wants to switch over to, we've swapped over to some wet bolts from Moride. Now, that does require a bronze bushing. You cannot use a nylon bushing with wet bolts because the grease isn't going to mesh well with the material that those nylon bushings are made with. Well, looks like I need to go even maybe a tad bit lower. We might be okay. All right, we're all ready here, and I can kind of scooch my suspension over to get that lined up properly. And we're lined up over here. Now I'm going to get the shoulder bolt in over here with our hanger just to avoid any fights later on down the road. Now, this is also personal preference. I prefer having the grease zerk fittings on the outside, so that way you can actually get to them and see them, and hopefully you are regularly putting some grease in, so that way your suspension stays in tip-top shape. When you're doing this though, make sure that you got the hole facing up. So that's where all of our grease is going to come out of. We want that to kind of make sure it's evenly spreading. So if we have it at the top, it's going to be a lot easier for it to kind of fall down and spread all over. But if you have it kind of down at the bottom, it might not come all the way to the top. Then we got a dry spot where something could potentially happen and we have a bind up. So I got that lined up, and I've got the flange nut nice and tight. I'm going to start hammering it in. That one went in super nice. Every other one I've done has usually fought me. Typically, if I'm having a hard time, what I can do is just start to tighten down on that nut, and then that'll help kind of draw it back in. Now that I'm at the point where I'm going to start pulling on that, I want to make sure that I have a wrench on here because we don't want that to start twisting. So one thing I like to do is we need to have enough room for our leaf spring to flow back and forth as the suspension compresses and decompresses. So I like getting under it because then you can see the gap here. And the nice thing about these Moride bolts is they all have a shoulder on them, so there's a stopping point. If we look at our other one here, let me grab it. So if we look at our other one here, we have a shoulder on it, which is this stopping point here. So the nut can't go past that point. So once we have that all the way tightened down, it's only going to stop right there, and then we don't have it going any further. So I'm going to kind of use that as my guide of when to stop, but I also want to make sure that maybe that bolt is just slightly longer than what our hanger is, and you know, we don't want to overdo it and then have it be too tight to where our suspension can't move. So right there is where we're stopping, and I still have about an 1/8 inch of a gap on this side. Now this suspension's gonna need to kind of move a little bit here. There we go. So you can see we've got about a 1/16 on either side once I kind of have that moving. We are going to put on our U-bolts. So we've got our leaf spring, or slipper spring, sitting up here. We've got our shoulder bolt in our hanger, and now it's time to add on our bracket for our shock absorbers. So those are going to mount up to this plate right here. So we want to make sure that we have these angled the correct way. So this is going to need to have that fin facing in towards the slipper spring box. So if we were looking at it, which I've already did this side, you can see I have it facing inward towards that slipper spring box, so I need to make sure that I'm putting the correct one on. So for this side over here at the front, here we go, having it face in. There we go. Now I'm going to hold that from the bottom, and I'm going to throw on a couple of nuts here to help keep this up, and it'll be a lot easier to get our other U-bolt on. Did a bad job cutting the threads on the end here, so this nut doesn't want to easily slide on. Run these down by hand just to get them a little snug. Make sure that you are keeping the amount of threads even though. So we want nice even pressure, and then the other thing we want to look for is this pin in the center. We want to make sure that we have this nice and lined up right in the center of it. If you're kind of off too much to one side, make sure that you're moving it and getting it snug down to match. So it's hard to see with the camera, but in the instructions they have a little diagram. It's going to show that inner pin. So that's the pin that's on top holding all of our leaf spring stack together. So it's typically just a bolt head, and that matches up with the hole that's in our tie plate for our Comfort Ride system, plus also for the U-bolt here. So we just want to make sure that that's centered inside this hole and it's not angled weird, because that can actually end up causing issues later on, give you uneven tire wear. But now that we have that in place, I'm going to run it down just a bit, and then we will torque these. And luckily with the instructions at the back, they give you all different kinds of torque settings depending on what size you're using, and then also the actual specific axle that you have. So in our case, looks like we have a Dexter axle just based on the axle tag that I'm seeing from our axle tube here. So then we would just look back at the instructions, figure out exactly what we need to have this torqued down to. I don't think I need it. As I do this, I'm going to go up about 10, 15 foot-pounds. All right, with all that torqued down, now we're going to come back over to our slipper spring box. We have a few pieces of hardware we're going to put in. So we'll have our 7/16 bolt that's going to sit in the bottom, and then a 9/16 bolt that's going to sit up top with a wear plate on it. And this is also going to have a spacer tube that's going to sit in there. So it looks like I'm going to need to kind of pump up on our axle here, get a little bit more clearance. Move this over. Alright, so we'll take our 7/16 bolt, our sleeve, and then on the other side we're going to have a lock nut. Now we're in a good spot to throw on our wear plate. That's this guy right here, and the flat end is going to sit right on our slipper spring. That's just going to ride on that and prevent this from being able to pop out. We'll line that up. Looks like I'm going to have to lift it up just a bit. Actually, I could probably use my jack to lift my axle up. There we go. And once we have that all lined up, we're going to throw in another 9/16 bolt and a lock nut on the back. And I've already gone ahead and done that on the other side, so at this point now we can just torque down our bolts. We're going to start with our center bolt. We'll move out to the outer bolts for our wear plates, or pads, and then we can drop down to the 7/16 bolts that have that sleeve that the slipper springs rest on. For this, I'm using a 7/8 socket on the nut side, and on the bolt head side I got a 13/16 wrench. That's going to be for all of our 9/16 hardware. For our 7/16 hardware, it's going to be a 5/8 socket and wrench. With all of our hardware torqued down on this side, now it is time to add on our extension brackets for our shocks. And if you take a closer look at it, you'll notice that one of the holes on the end is just slightly spaced further away, and that's the hole that the bottom of our shock is going to mount into. Now, the holes that we use up here are going to depend on whether our leaf springs are sitting above or below our axle. Now, with our leaf springs sitting above the axle, we're going to go ahead and use the top two holes. If our leaf springs were below our axle, we would swap over to the middle two holes here. And when we're mounting these up, we want to make sure that we're using the 1/2" hardware, which is going to have a white nylock nut with it. Make sure that you aren't mixing and matching these. They will start to go on but then not work, because this is a metric bolt next to it, and it's got a blue nylock nut, and it's a little bit smaller if you put them side by side. So it's easy to accidentally thread on one of these onto the other bolt and then have it not work after a certain point, and we don't want to mix those up. So I like to just set those aside just to start off with. We'll come back to that along with the rest of our hardware. But in the meantime, what we're going to do is get under our trailer, and we're going to slap this onto that plate that we stuck, that tie plate under our U-bolts. And we're going to take two of our bolts, we'll pass those through, and then on the inside of that plate, we're going to add on our nut. We'll put our extension plate on, drop in one of our bolts. It's a little bit easier to get the nut on the first one if the second one's not in the way, so we'll get that started. And then our next bolt. And I'm going to snug these down with a 3/4 inch socket and wrench. And then we can come back with our torque wrench and torque it down. Now on the top one, you will have to torque on the bolt head instead of the nut, but on the bottom one, you should be able to get your socket in there. And then we're just going to repeat this over on our other side. For the top bolt, we are going to throw on a washer. That's going to slip through our shock. After that, we're going to have another washer, a spacer, a wedge washer, and then we're going to put this up on our slipper spring box. On the inside, we're going to have another wedge washer and flat washer, and then a lock nut. Now, when we're putting this up here, we want to make sure that on the outside, we have the wedge washer facing so that the fat end of it is in line with our shock. So the angle it's going to be at needs to sit along with the shock up to our mount at the bottom as well. And then on the inside, we're going to do the exact opposite. So it'll be fat side on the outside. On the inside, we're going to have the skinny side down facing towards the bottom of our shock. Now, I find it's a lot easier to just kind of get it started on there, get it a little bit tight, just a little bit snug down, and then try and force your washers over, because these are going to fight you the whole time you're tightening it down until you finally get it set. A lot of the time, I'll try and stick like a flathead screwdriver up in there, and if I've got this sitting the wrong way, and then I can kind of push it and get it to flip, it really just takes a little bit of patience, though. So we're going to get this in. I find doing the top makes it a whole lot easier, and then from there you can force your way over and get the bottom in too. All right, for our bottom, it's going to be a bolt and a flat washer. We're going to run that through On this side, we're going to have a spacer, a flat washer. Our shock's going to go on, so I'm going to back that up just a bit. Get that lined up. You may have to compress the shock just a tiny bit to get it to fully line up right. And then another flat washer and our nylock nut. So now that we know exactly what our angle is going to be, we can kind of play with our spacer or wedge blocks here. Yeah, I'm going to grab my flat washer. We're going to flip this one because you can see I got the fat end sticking down on the inside and we need to have the skinny end. Now that one's snug, we'll snug down the bottom one as well, and then we can come back with our torque wrench. Once you have everything torqued down, now's the point where you can remove these bands. They're just held on with a little bit of tape. And that'll do it. Now the passenger and driver side are exactly the same, so once you knock out one of these assemblies, you should be well enough to knock out all the rest of them and be in good hands. Throw your wheels on. Now we're finally ready to torque down our lug nuts. Make sure that when you're torquing these down, you are going in a star pattern. That way you're making sure you're getting even pressure on your wheel. And then typically once I get through that star pattern, I'll just one more time test each one, make sure that tightening of one lug nut didn't potentially loosen another. Now once you have all of these torqued down to spec, that's going to do it for the install, and you're going to be ready to get out there on the road with a much more comfortable ride. Well, that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the Roadmaster Comfort Ride suspension system here on our 2021 Grand Design Reflection fifth wheel trailer. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right suspension upgrade for your trailer, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department. We'd be happy to help you out on your journey.